Welcome to Healing Generations, a podcast creating a dialogue uplifting the importance of healing, strengthening, and supporting our communities, and that addresses the disparities and inequities in communities of color. Healing Generations is brought to you by the Healing Generations Institute, a collaborative initiative of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on our new releases.
Well, I want to welcome you. This is Tello from the Healing Generations Institute and the Healing Generations podcast. And I want to say, Kalasuko Matli, thank you for being here. Noxtin no Mekayadsin, which greets you and all our relations. And, in this new year, I want to say Happy New Year, Happy Winter Solstice, Happy Kwanzaa, just happy day, Thank you for joining us this new year, and we began this cycle of life, this circle of life, in an interesting way because, there's a transition from many things that went on last year, but people were so excited that it was 2021, and we're going to talk a little bit about that 2021, moving from that 2020 vision and what did we see in last year, and how does that teach us or inform us for this new year. But I want to begin in a good way by just thanking Creator and all of our ancestors. I say to you, thank you. So blessed to have you with us here. And this, takes on a lot greater meaning for a lot of us this year because we've seen many people transition, many people, cross over to become ancestors. And we have people right now that are struggling. So it becomes a thing of gratitude just to when people show up, when people are able to show up and be here, and so I invite you to really give thanks just for you being able to be here and listen and show up in whatever way you show up. That's that first step to our growth, to our development, to our learning, to our healing. It's showing up. So I give you thanks for showing up. I'm hoping that you enjoyed last week's meditation that myself and Maestra Susie offered, and it's a meditation that we recorded a while back, but people keep asking for it. So we wanted to start the new year with that reflection, with that prayer, with that calming, with that reminder that it's important for us to ground ourselves and get connected in that way. And so as we begin this year, just want to acknowledge your ancestors and all the sacrifices and all the teachings and all the blessings that they've given you, and even the struggles. We come from a way of life that in our indigenous way that we look at life in duality, that sense of night and day, that sense of ixli or lodel or cari corazon or face and heart or yin and yang, or the duality of will and intent from many, many different cultures. And that really informs us of, how life really is. And so as we begin our dialogues and our podcast about how do we heal generations of wounds, heal generations of a false narrative, how do we heal generations of colonial thought and patriarchy and misogyny and racism and supremacy and all of those things that separate us from that, being able to show up wholly and being able to show up in a sacred way and being able to show up as blessings. We call to our ancestors and to all that medicine and all those teachings and all of those songs and those drum beats and those prayers and those chants and the vibration that has carried us forward, And I know for me, there's been those times in which, and maybe this is one of those times in which, you struggle and you're not sure how you're going to get out of that struggle, and what we may not realize, what you may not realize, what has been not shared with you, because, sometimes this world doesn't want us to really know, to really understand the strength that we have in our own rootedness, the strength that we have in our own culture, the strength that we have in our ancestral wisdom. So they don't share these things with you. In fact, will share a counter narrative with you. But one of the teachings that I've learned from the elders and the medicine people and the writings and life in general is the vibration of our ancestors, those prayers, those songs, those sacrifices, the sweat and tears that they've gone through. The vibration of all of that is within us. And in those times when you don't know what, how you're going to get through, will carry you. All those vibration, all that energy, all those songs, all those prayers can really carry you forward. So I want to, invite you to contemplate that and think about that and welcome that into your life. We, in this Healing Generations podcast, we've invited a whole number of people this last year. We did 28 episodes, and we're so blessed to have so many wisdom keepers that journeyed along with us and shared their stories and shared their teachings and shared their messages. And, today I want to just reflect on some of those teachings. It take too many podcasts to really reflect on all the teachings, but there was some teachings that I think are very significant as we move ahead, with this year and move on. And we are in this transition, and we in my culture believe this is el sexto sol, the sixth sun. It's the sun. It's the time and the phase of transition, of transformation. It's a time of the feminine, of which we get called to go inside, and many of us throughout this year have been really called to go inside. To shelter in place, and not only just in a physical place. We've had to shelter in the place of really reconnecting with that spirit within us. And sometimes when you begin to go inside, you have to face those many things that maybe we've been able to avoid by staying busy and staying so occupied with work or traveling or doing things. And what this time has challenged us to do is to, face our truth, to face the teachings, and to face maybe those lessons that now it's important for us to recollect, and it's important for us to recall, and it's important for us to work through. So this sexto sol is that time that we get called to face truth. And if nothing else, we have faced this year is a whole lot of truth. And that may be puzzling for some people because we've seen a lot of untruths as well. We've seen a lot of falsehoods. But even in that, you begin to recognize, what is reality? What is the true reality? And we've seen it. We've seen that true reality of racism that, has really shown itself. I mean, it's always been here. It's always been around in this country. When the newcomers came, they brought their woundedness, and sometimes we don't recognize that as that woundedness that, many of the Europeans that came and the people that came to this country came fleeing from their own wounds and their own oppression. And they brought that woundedness with them in their bodies, in their vibration, and the way they saw life. And so that woundedness then, as in anything, if you don't deal with your woundedness, then you're going to transfer it. And they transferred that woundedness to, a lot of people, and our native relatives, our African relatives, and immigrant populations, and we see it manifesting today. So, we see the ramifications of not facing truth, not facing the wounds. And it's, reverberated in this country for, close to 500 years. And that reverberation is transferred into systems of oppression, systems of hurt, of woundedness, of falsehoods. But this year has been one in which we begin to see, the revelations of truth, and we saw it in the election of, who you choose and what values and what types of people do you choose to lift up and stand up for. But we also have seen it in this pandemic of COVID-19, in which the inequities have shown forth. The inequities have shown forth in which the generations of woundedness have then made certain populations very vulnerable. Their immune systems have been compromised for generations, and now we see the result of that. That a disproportionate number of people of color, of disenfranchised populations, are getting sick and dying, and at the same time, our relatives that work as essential workers are on those front lines. We've always been on those front lines. Our people have always been on those front lines, whether it's been the front lines of work in the fields and feeding the world, whether it's been on the front lines of healthcare and working and cleaning and serving, whether it's been on the front lines of healthcare, of mental health care in communities, whether it's in the front lines of working in the streets and advocating for the rights of others. We've always been on those front lines. But as those warriors on the front lines, that was one of the teachings that came early on when we listened to Maestra Concha Salcedo. And, she was one of the first that we interviewed this year, one of the elders. And, she talked about, that in her life, she came through that civil rights movement and was one of, the advocates for justice and part of the Chicano movement, but also marched with those in the fields and with our African American relatives through the civil rights movement as well. And she talked about that anger that was in her and that she felt, and that she understood that anger was really a longing for wholeness, that it reverberated inside of her when she saw inequity and injustice and maltreatment. And one of the teachings was that she had to figure out a way to transform that anger into love. And when she said that, it was like, what? How do you take and approach injustice and inequity and hurt and pain and transform that into love? And what her message was is, no, you don't love the action. You don't love what is going on, but you cannot let the woundedness of others then be the vibration that you work with. So that she taught us that you can still be strong and still be advocates and still march and still protest, or still be healers and still be policymakers and still do it in a strong way and still do it in a truthful way and still do it in a warrior way, but do it out of love, not out of hate for somebody, not out of hate for people, but out of love for all people, love for all our relationships, love for justice, love for a sense of equity. And so the maestra really talked to us about that transformation. And I would say, that it's important. It's important for us to contemplate that this year, because we see a lot of angry people, on both sides. And sometimes that anger, I know for me, it just lifts up again. I thought I had dealt with it. I thought I had healed it. I thought I had, through my ceremony and through my traditions and ways, I thought I had dealt with a lot of the anger. And I know, when the incidents of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and so many other Black and brown and indigenous and Native people that are not even mentioned, when I saw the news and saw the pictures and saw the video, it like reverberated my body. I felt it at the pit of my stomach. I felt myself tense up. I felt my jaw tense up, and I felt my hands like ball up in a fist, like I was back in Compton in the neighborhood. It was almost like I hadn't done any work. And what I had to realize, and it was shared, by some of the teachers that came on the podcast, Grace Sesma, that talked to us about how, our body remembers. There's a genetic memory about about the woundedness that goes on. And it's not so that it can debilitate us or that it can make us suffer, but it's so that we don't forget. Because the other thing that has gone on in the society, and Dr. Wade Nobles talked to us about, that the racism and the hate of people, that if you're not careful, that hate can get in you, and it can get in your body. And then if you don't realize the source of the hate, if you don't realize the source of the injustice, then it can become ingrained in you and ingrained in the way you do things. Dr. Nobles reminded us of the toxicity of the society that we're living in, the toxicity of the systems that we live within, the toxicity even of the philosophy of mental health and health that wants to put the blame and the ownership of a woundedness on the individual or the family or the culture. And what Dr. Nobles reminded us of is, no, we may be carrying it, but it's not ours. It's really not our wounds. It's the wounds that have been transferred from people that are not willing to deal with their own woundedness, their own hatred, their own systematized policies that want to keep them superior and in control. And we know that sense of wanting to be in control and wanting to be superior, because we see it not only in our systems, we see it not only in our society, but also, if we're not careful, it filters into our homes and into our relationships. Maestra Patricia Castillo reminded us of that as she works with those wounded women and those wounded men that then are the result of violence in relationships. And that's the superiority and wanting to control then can get into our families and into our relationships. And the fear of not being in control, if you think that's what you need to do, if that's the ideal relationship, then manifests in you hurting or reacting in a hurtful way to others. And how she reminded us that we need to do our own work. And that work starts with us. I've shared with you all, a number of times that, part of the medicine that I've gained on this journey, came from a group of men that we gathered 32 years ago, and our goal was to really address some of this internalized depression, some of the violence that went on in our homes, the drug abuse, the domestic violence, the gang violence, the misogyny, the sexual abuse, all those things that we saw going on in our home. And I shared with you, as Dr. Carrillo had reminded us as well, about the ramifications of not understanding our true narrative, not understanding who we really are. And this society really, part of the way that it breaks us down is it gives us a false narrative. It makes us ashamed of who we are by not letting us know about our medicine or about our history or about our true culture, the sacredness of who we are, and begins then to propagate a narrative of deficiency or inadequacy, and only shares the part of our history that will shame us or make us feel bad about who we are. And so that gathering that took place, 32 years ago, in which a group of us men gathered, and Dr. Carrillo and I were two of the people that called to the men, because we knew we had seen in our own homes that violence. And so the reverberation of that woundedness was in me. I didn't understand that that's what I was really trying to do, is to heal my own wound with my own father, who I had seen disrespect my mother in many different ways. But so we gathered with the thought that we were going to create programs and create interventions. And as we sat in that sacred circle, after we shared our prayer and after we asked the ancestors to come in, the ancestors stepped in. And what the ancestors revealed to us is that we were wounded, that those generational wounds, even though we're so-called the professionals, the social workers, the therapists, the advocates, the lawyers, the teachers, is that we hadn't dealt with our own woundedness. and that some of those wounds that society historically had presented and inflicted on us were now within us. We carried in our bodies, in our minds, in our narrative, in our relationships, and if we didn't be careful, we would pass them on to the next generation. And so we learned a valuable lesson with those elders that came on that talked to us about doing our own work. And that because you have woundedness doesn't make you dysfunctional. It doesn't mean that you're dysfunctional, it means that you're human. Because we all have that duality. I was mentioning that duality of night and day. And so we all have that blessing of the light, blessings of traditions and customs. And even if you don't know, even if you don't logically in your mind remember, didn't have a grandma that passed on those teachings to you, didn't have that ceremonial way, it's in your DNA, it's in your genetic memory. And so we must call to those light teachings, those ways, and we have to water them. We have to really, water them. And, as we were discussing with Baba Kweli, who is a healing practitioner, a chiropractor, but also a practitioner of history and of words and of changing narratives and recalibrating the true narrative. He shared with us about how if we don't deal with these things, if we don't address these things, the body keeps the score. And the body then begins to tighten up and I know, I know myself, in going to practitioners, I think I'm fine. I'm going just to get an adjustment and and going to my chiropractor, he says, man, you are all crooked. And I said, no, it's just my neck. No, it's not your neck. It's your back. It's your legs. It's down to your ankles. It's your head is too tight. And you're all off balance. But sometimes we get so used to being off balance that we can't even recognize. And Baba Kweli talked to us about the importance, of listening to our bodies, of feeling our bodies, of feeling that vibration, right? So that we know, we can recognize when we're not right. And what this pandemic has really illuminated is some of the things that are not right, that we don't feel good about. It's really gave us some time to reflect. And for some of us, it's been very scary. For some of us, it's been very troubling to feel those things and to not know, because they're foreign to us because we haven't paid attention to them. But it's really given us an opportunity to now reconnect with our rhythm, with our song, with that that vibration that is healthy for us. And early on, Baba Greg Hodge, shared with us about those rhythms, about the rhythms of the drum, about the memory of the drum, in each of our cultures. And in each of our cultures, there is a drum. There's a sacred drum that vibrates in sync with the drum that our mamas gave us. Our mamas gave us that heartbeat. So we are genetically connected that way. And Baba Greg Hodge and Baba Moshe and other brother Maestro Garcia began to share rhythms and songs and talk to us about the historical context of why we have this music and why we have the drums and why we chant and why we sing and why we pray with rhythm and why we have these ways of singing sacred songs. Because what happens when you get into a certain vibration, to a certain rhythm that is sacred, it links up with all of those ancestor ways, right? All those things, And I remember that. I remember that vibration, that rhythm. I didn't recognize it at the time, but I remembered that when babies would cry, my mama or my grandma or one of the women would go pick up that baby, and the baby's crying, wow, 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 all over the place, right? And they go pick up that baby, and you hear them roo, 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 alla roo, roo, mijito, alla roo, 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 ya. Alla roo, roo, mijito, alla roo, 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 ya. And I didn't understand, that's just a baby song. But that baby that was crying calmed down and many times fell asleep, grounded, back in the sacredness, back in the mother's womb, back in that sacred song. So we were reminded by a number of people that carry song and rhythm and carry music and vibrations as their medicine, the importance of finding our song, the importance of us really utilizing our song, of us creating our song, of us singing our song, singing our vibrations, taking time to vibrate with our prayers, and even to the extent of being reminded that silence is a sound too. It's a certain vibration when you sit in silence, and silence, different places, sounds different. But where is your silence? And what we learn, from many of these elders as they came through, is that you must create a time. You must allocate a time in which you can be quiet. And when you allow the silence. And next week we're going to hear from Maestra Susie and Maestra Deborah, who will talk to us again. They came on and Maestra Susie talked to us about, the significance of prayer, the significance of being in your own prayer way, of developing your own, prayer rituals. And she mentioned to us the importance of creating a time of silence, a time where you're not saying anything, but that you're just listening and taking in. It's almost, she said, we a lot of times exhale but never leave room to inhale the blessings from the Creator, to inhale the blessings from the ancestors, to inhale the teachings, to inhale the medicine. So she reminded us, along with Maestra Deborah, of us creating time in order that we could get that medicine, so we could hear the teachings, so we can feel the answers, so that we can really begin to grow that part of us, the light part of us, so that when the other part, the shadow part comes, when the challenges come, when the conflicts come, we have medicine and we have songs and we have traditions that can guide us through. And so it's about that teaching of how do we create that space in which we can continue to learn and continue to grow and continue to vibrate that way. As we, went along in listening to, the different teachers. One of my good friends, moi, from Washington, D.C., where she lives now, talked to us, about her historical journey. And it was really powerful, to me that when she talked about that transition from her living amongst the nature, in the trees, listening to the water, listening to the wind, in the jungle of where she lived. And then when they moved here, hearing nothing, being nothing but on concrete, and hearing sirens, and hearing the noise, and what a tremendous shock that was for her. How it really distorted her sense of well-being, and that what she had to do is learn how to acclimate herself in the society without losing the sense of who she was. And the beautiful message that Me shared with us was that, her whole journey of becoming a lawyer, and then because the community called for it, because the community called that they needed a voice. They needed someone that understood them, someone that loved them, someone that saw them, someone that could represent them, that they needed to be in a political position. And she says, I never thought of doing that, but because the community needed someone, and they called me, then I ran for office, never thinking that I could do that I would even want to be that. And I don't know how many times, probably all of you have felt yourself in a position, why am I doing this? Can I do this? Am I capable of doing this? I don't even want to do this. But sometimes the community calls us to step up, to speak up, to step in, and to be the voice. And she shared that teaching of when she won that election. And she looked out and she saw all these people that looked like her. All these generations, and the young girls and other women and the elders, that was their dream. These elders that had sacrificed, that worked 2-3 jobs, that traveled across an ocean to get here so that they could fulfill a dream that their children and grandchildren would have better opportunities. And she said she looked out in the audience and she saw people crying with joy. And then she had to speak. And she was so filled with emotion, happy emotion, but with emotion, that she didn't know she could speak. And her grandmother came up to her and says, you are our voice. You must speak. You are our voice. And with that, she was able to speak. And she was able to give thanks and be in gratitude to all those people that showed up for her and represent them for a whole number of years. But then she realized that was only part of the journey. Her struggling and her fighting for racial equity and justice was only part of the duality. Because then she realized also the reason why so many people were acting in an inappropriate way, were oppressing others and being racist, and is because they were wounded. And the other part of that was that those that were wounded never got healed, so that those wounds got transferred into families and communities, including hers, and they were including mine too, and probably all of ours that are listening. The journey then gave her another part of her sacred journey, part of her sacred purpose, and that was to focus on racial healing. And so she began that journey of racial healing. And many of us, many of you, that's the work you do as well. That we must recognize the duality of both. Yes, we have to do systemic change, and yes, we had to advocate for policy change, and yes, we have to advocate, against racism and oppression and misogyny and patriarchy, all of that. But the duality of that is we also must then focus on healing these generations and healing the wounds of so many of us, and it starts with us. It really, really starts with us. And that blessing of going on this journey of racial healing, of individual healing, of community healing, of our own family healing. And one of the teachings that came very strong through all of this was the teaching of forgiveness. That we recognize that through this generations of dealing with a society and a system that is built on a racist, capitalistic way of life, if you will, that there's a lot of wounds there. There's a lot of wounds there that have then been transferred into our communities, into our own families, into our own relationships. And so many of us struggle with the wounds, yes, of society, but also the wounds that we have experienced from our own relatives, from our own parents sometimes, from people in our own community. And so our community becomes divided. And so we must do our own work. And that's what this podcast is about. That's about what the work of the National Compadres Network, the Brotherhood of Elders, the Comadres Network, and their effort, which they will introduce next week, Amayeli, which is a beautiful effort about really nurturing the water, cleansing the water, enriching that next generation that way. We must do that work for this next generation. And that's the work that this Healing Generations Institute calls us to do. Calls us really to take the responsibility of acknowledging our blessings, but also acknowledging our wounds. And that first step of acknowledging that and then understanding it, understanding that sometimes the woundedness that has come to us has come because of the woundedness of even our relatives, our parents. And it wasn't because they wanted to wound us, and it doesn't mean they weren't accountable for what they did. But part of our growth and healing is being able to forgive. And forgive doesn't mean you forget. It just means that you stop blaming them and you give them back the woundedness. You say, I don't understand, and let me share my goodness now. And that transformation, which we will spend a whole session just on forgiveness this year. We're going to talk just about that forgiveness. We're going to talk this year about gratitude. We're going to talk this year about compassion. We're going to talk this year about how do we uplift ourselves in the midst of struggle and chaos. And so as you begin then to contemplate your walk this year, in this year of 2021, we invite you to walk with us on this journey. And we invite you that if there's certain topics or certain speakers you'd like to hear, to let us know. Let us know, and maybe some of you are great teachers and great healers. You'd like to come on and share some words with us. And this now in this second phase of this next year of the podcast, we're going to diversify a little bit. So I will be coming to you once a month to really share, with the people that I bring on. But then Maestra Deborah and Maestra Susie will then be guiding one of the podcast weeks as well, and share the teachings that come, from those people that they bring on. We then, because I'm going to bring on the elder focus, and they're going to bring, another focus. We then will also have a Yelder focus, and when we have the three generations we call elders, Yelders, and then youth, right? And so we will have a week that will deal with the Yelders, those that are in between. Those are the bridge people, the ones between the youth and the elders. And a lot of times, you all that are the Yelders are really the ones that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting, a lot of the heavy work, a lot of the transformational work. And so we're going to invite conversation and dialogue about that perspective, that third direction. And then the fourth direction, the fourth week of podcast every month, will be our young people. And we would invite young people to come on and share their teachings, their flow, their riff, however they do it. They're going to bring on their rhythms and their perspective as well. And so that we can have a more comprehensive look at how do we heal, and what are that medicine that we need to bring forward for all of our generations that way. With that, I want to thank you. Thank you for joining us this week, and invite you to continue, on your journey with us. And I'm excited about this year that we're going to really have some wonderful, wonderful dialogue and wonderful medicine and wonderful healing that will go on, and we thank again the ancestors, and we thank all of you for your support. And we invite you to continue listening, and may you continue your blessings. May you continue your work, and may you can continue sharing all the healing medicine with that next generation to go on. Thank you very much. Glasukamat.
For more information about Healing Generations and the Healing Generations Institute, visit nationalcompadresnetwork.org and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our new releases.